G'day, see you. It's great to be with you again after the break. I hope you had a great break. And we're continuing on now in our series in the book of James. We're looking at James chapter 4, verses 1 to 10 this evening. And you'll remember, or maybe you won't, but I'll remind you, last time we looked at James, Colin pointed out in his talk in the passage immediately prior that there are two types of wisdom that James identifies. There's this earthly wisdom, and there's this heavenly wisdom. James says in that passage, before the one we're looking at tonight, that earthly wisdom is characterized by bitter envy and selfish ambition, as opposed to heavenly wisdom, which is characterized by purity, a peace-loving nature, and fruits of righteousness. It's full of mercy, James says. Now, as we go on into this section in chapter 4, James digs deeper and talks about how to cultivate this heart of wisdom. And so that's our question tonight. How do we cultivate this heart of wisdom? Now, the first thing that James says here, and I've got 3 points. The first thing he says is deal with the dysfunctionality. Recognize the dysfunctionality of earthly wisdom. Earthly wisdom, of course, has an appearance of wisdom. It's wisdom after all, but ultimately it's dysfunctional. I think you can see a lot of the values of this world and its dysfunctionality played out in TV shows like Survivor. Survivor is all about survival of the fittest. You know, the person with the most toys at the end wins. That's what it's all about. And so in Survivor, I think it really gives us this sort of intensified, concentrated version of really how the world works. And in it, it's interesting to note that there are lots of good things along the way there, right? Like there are friendships that are formed. There are these beautiful island paradises that they enjoy. People on the show generally have some values. Some have really high values and try to stick to them, you know, values of integrity, honesty, being loyal to others. But at the end of the day, right, all of those things get thrown under the bus on the altar of winning the money at the end and being declared the winner. That's what it's all about. And that's what this world is all about. If you take away God, what's left? It's making the most of this life. And for us, living in a consumeristic society, it's all about following the covetous desires of our heart. And James points out here in this passage that earthly wisdom is driven by a covetous heart. When you take God out of the picture, all that is left is this world and experiences that we can have in this world. And we meet the longing of our heart for joy, for peace, by pursuing just stuff in this world. That's what covetousness is, a yearning for something that someone else has somewhere that makes them seem happier than us. That's what covetousness is, a yearning for a thing or a place which we have not yet attained. It's what drives us in this world if you take away God. And James says, really, this is ultimately dysfunctional. Listen to what he says about it. He has a very harsh assessment of it. What causes fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? You desire, but you do not have, so you kill. You covet, but you cannot get what you want, so you quarrel and fight. He's talking there somewhat hyperbolically in the extremes. He's saying you cannot have, so you kill. He's not saying that, you know, the streets are full of bloodshed in the churches that he's writing to. Rather, he's saying that that's your heart. Because you prioritize things over people and relationships, and because you're not finding your contentment in God, life is inherently competitive. At the end of the day, you will throw someone under the bus if it's a toss-up between them and your happiness. This is no way to live. So the first point in cultivating a heart of wisdom, of heavenly wisdom, is dealing with the dysfunctionality of earthly wisdom. Wake up and see how corrosive and destructive it really is to your soul and my soul and to our relationships. Secondly, James goes on to say, identify the root cause or recognize the root cause. And the root cause, according to James, in the next few verses, is that we're enemies. We've become enemies of God. That we're in fact following Satan now. We've become demon worshippers. When we take God out of the picture and we just follow covetous desires, it's because we have a purely horizontal perspective on life. We're just looking at people around us, our neighbours, and we want what they're having. And it's a fundamentally competitive view of the world. When we're just looking at stuff that's in front of us that we can immediately see, if that takes up all of our perspective, then it makes sense that our life just becomes about material possessions and fun experiences and trying to gain those to fill the void and the restlessness of the heart. And to us, this can seem completely innocuous. Everyone's doing it. And a lot of the time, in a really prosperous society, we don't realize quite how dysfunctional it is, and everyone seems to be kind of getting along okay. So what's the big deal? Well, James says, recognize the root. When you do this, you are denying the existence of God. You're purely focusing on the horizontal. So you're ignoring the vertical, the fact that there is a God who made everything, who holds you together, who is really, should be the object of our desires and the thing that we pursue in life. And so when we live like this, we're in fact enemies of God. We're not just ignoring him. We're not just sort of being agnostic about him. We are living as an enemy of him. So recognize the root cause here, being an enemy of God. And finally, of course, the logical conclusion is, therefore, humble yourself. And that's the final point that James makes in this passage. If we want to cultivate a heart of wisdom, humble yourself. I have to humble myself. That is, don't take it upon myself to try and be happy and to be full and to find joy the only way I know how, which is by gaining stuff I see around me, by pursuing stuff that other people have. No, I need to humble myself and entrust myself to God, trusting that if I pursue him, he will be the one who gives me life and fulfills the needs of my heart. Humble myself. The last section is bracketed by this exhortation to humble ourselves. He says there in verse 6, God opposes the proud but shows favor to the humble. And in verse 10 he says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will lift you up. And in this section comes this really wonderful and powerful promise. He says, if you resist the devil, Satan will flee from you. The devil will flee from you. If you resist the devil will flee. And if we come near to God, God will come near to us. Change can be really hard, can't it? It's so natural for us to be driven by worldly wisdom, earthly wisdom. But here it's saying, you're not alone. And God is making two great and precious and powerful promises that are complementary. If you resist the devil, he will go. He will leave you alone. And if you come near to God, God will come near to you. He will comfort you. He will change your perspective on life. He will realign your values. And he will introduce you to a richness of life you didn't even realize was possible. There's concrete promises there. God will help you. Change is possible. So what? Well, two final applications to land this talk tonight. The first one is this. We, of course, need to repent of earthly wisdom. We need to repent of a heart that is driven by covetous desires. Materialism, consumerism is a euphemism. We need to get this. Materialism and consumerism is a euphemism for demonic worship, for worship of Satan. They're euphemisms for being an enemy of God, for living a life of evil. We need to repent of that. It's not just something which is dysfunctional, which doesn't deliver on its promises. It's bad. It's deeply, deeply bad and wrong and evil and sinful. Get rid of it. Repent of it. But secondly, under so what, we need to be released by heavenly wisdom. Living a law according to our covetous desires is really a cruel way to live. I love this quote from John Piper. Occasionally, weep deeply over the life you hoped would be. Grieve the losses, then wash your face, trust God, and embrace the life you have. You see, what John Piper is articulating there, I think, is a really realistic view of the world as sinners in this world. There are many things that we long for and want in this world that we just can't have. And his very wise advice, I think, is just to acknowledge it. Grieve over that. Grieve over that sense of loss, of just naturally falling in, living in a fallen creation. But then get up, wash your face, trust God, and embrace the life he gives you. There's an amazing freedom and release in that. Once we live a life where we're trusting God and just being thankful for what he gives us, we are freed up to not compete against our neighbour, but to love them. We're freed up to stop and smell the roses and enjoy the day that God gives us, instead of being consumed by this relentless pursuit of a life we have not yet attained. It's a wonderful freedom to live in. So what? Repent and be released by heavenly wisdom. Humble ourselves and pursue heavenly wisdom.